there's really quite a large number of issues around the labour and employment space at the moment. We've seen at least, well, 2 million jobs disappear during the pandemic. There's a debate raging at the moment about whether it can be legal to make vaccines mandatory in the workplace. And in the middle of all of that is a series of other really important issues. So this week, the National Assembly failed to pass the Employment Equity Amendment Bill because there wasn't a quorum, there weren't enough MPs in the House. There's also a move to pass a bill to comply with that constitutional court ruling that domestic workers must receive compensation if they are hurt or even pass away at work. Well, the Minister of Employment and Labour is Thulas Nxesi, and he joins us now. Minister, good afternoon to you, and thank you very much indeed for your time this Friday afternoon. Let's start with what happened in Parliament. You must have been disappointed the Employment Equity Amendment Bill did not pass.
Well, certainly, Stephen, as you know, the bill failed to pass this time around because the House did not contain the quorum of the voting MPs. This was due to two reasons. Firstly, the sabotage by the opposition parties, the DA and the EFF. And this was in any case expected because some of them are anti-transformation. And the second reason, shamefully to me personally, there were not enough ANC MPs physically present to vote and form that quorum. And I think COSATU has been very harsh, but fair in their criticism of us for this reason, because this is a very, very important bill which is about the transformation of the labour market.
Well, I mean, it's sort of astounding because every year it's one of these annual rituals that we have. The Employment Equity Commission will report and they'll say that there are many, many white male managers, maybe not working in Sandton anymore, but for Sandton-based companies and managing those companies, and not enough black people, and certainly not enough black women in top management. Along comes an opportunity to change that. And I mean, I would have thought ANC MPs would make certain they were there.
Yes, I mean, given the embarrassing statistics, if we look at the top management and senior management in many of the companies, you would realize that we're still talking more than 50% being white, in some instances 64%. And when it comes to the Africans or the blacks, we're talking about very low numbers, but it's worse when it comes to women leadership, which therefore says there is a need to ensure that we are forcing the transformation at the workplace. I mean, the figures which I have, Stephen, is that the Africans only accounted for 15% and 24% for the top and the senior management, whereas the whites occupied 64% and 52% on both the top management and the senior management. Therefore, I mean, for women, for that matter, we're talking about they only accounted for 24% and 35%. And it's a very great concern that the representation of persons also with disabilities remained around just 1%. So I think everybody's supposed to take this matter very serious if we are serious about transformation. That's why I was saying it's shameful from our side that we could not be able to correct, because we have to take this matter very seriously. After almost more than 20 years we have had this legislation, it's clear that self-regulation is not working from the side of the employers.
The bill to make sure that domestic workers can get compensation if they're hurt at work, and this came from a High Court ruling, went to the Constitutional Court. They actually said that it would be retrospective, which is quite rare, but I can understand why they did that. That bill, as I understand it, still not yet passed. How much more work needs to be done before what the Constitutional Court has insisted on actually becomes law? To put it another way, before domestic workers are treated like other workers?
Well, there are two steps. The first one is that the two houses have to deal with the bill. It was dealt with at the level of the National Assembly. Now it's going into the other house, which the NCOP. Then after that, it will go to the president for promulgation. We will allow for those processes. We believe that at the beginning of the year, we would be able to deal with that particular matter, or even before the end of the year. However, there are no disputes on this one. We are ready to implement that particular legislation once it has been passed into law. So I don't see any problems with that, even when we're talking about retrospectively, but the various employees will just have to apply, and we see if they are complying in terms of the conditions which they are putting, and then we have to pay them. It's very unfortunate that this is our history. And if you look at how we dealt with this particular matter, when it was taken to the Constitutional Court, we didn't even oppose it. We allowed it to pass because we had already started the work to try and include those workers.
I must ask you about mandatory vaccinations, Minister. And I mean, you'll see you will have seen the arguments. I mean, it's flying around all over the place at the moment, not just in our country, but in other countries. The Labour Department, so your ministry, has a circular which says that a workplace health and safety committee can make vaccinations mandatory for workers. So that wouldn't be a boss just deciding or an employer just deciding. It would be a health and safety committee which would include workers. Is that still your position, that a workplace, through a health and safety committee, can demand that workers get vaccinated?
Well, our position, Stephen, is that there is legal opinion that in order to protect the rest of their workforce, an employer can require all employees to be vaccinated. And according to that legal opinion, this is legal and constitutional. But from the side of the Department of Employment and Labour, would maintain that employees have the rights and they cannot just be discriminated against for their personal health decisions. But no doubt, Stephen, this will end up, I would believe, it will end up in the court for a test case, because we've had different contradicting legal opinions on this matter. And it's clear that it might end up in court. For now, from the side of government, we've maintained an approach that says it's best to persuade people to do the right thing, get vaccinated in order to protect themselves. So protect their families and communities and fellow workers. But employees cannot be forced to be vaccinated. We believe what informs this, it's perceptions and a lot of myths. For instance, in Cape Town, there's a very exemplary employer who brought the vaccine to the workplace, and there were about 81 workers. Only 4 workers objected to this, and the employer did some consultation together with the department, and we had to call even the health people, sat with the workers, tried to persuade them, and it became very clear that it was more about lack of knowledge why some of the people are objecting to this. So we believe, therefore, persuasion is better than the threats. But maybe the courts will help us on this matter, and we believe we've been able to deal with very difficult issues. We have negotiated them in South Africa using the power of reason. And at the end, that power of reason is going to prevail more than threats and forcing the people to do that. And we think that what the employers should do is to look at the risks, and then they start declaring their positions, but call the employer representatives and the workers to consult with them. And also, we will also be consulting on these matters with the social partners at the level of network. And I think as the time goes on, we would be able to clear this particular matter.
Well, it's incredibly complicated, and yet, hopefully, as time goes on, more and more people will get vaccinated voluntarily, and while it will still be a difficult problem, won't be as big a problem, by which I mean, not that it's not a big problem, but it won't affect as many people. I mean, Discovery, an employer I think we can accept is going to know a lot about health and medicine, and I think about the law, have said that they're going to make it mandatory for their workers from the 1st of January. Do you think they're right to do that?
That's why I've said it's going to be depending when people do the risk assessment on the sector by sector, on the nature of that employment workplace. And I won't say they are wrong, I won't say they are right, but the issue is going to be, do you force individuals who have reasons to object, be they health reasons or what? And it's there in the constitutions. You can't be able to discriminate against that. But I think at the end it comes to a debate. That's why I was saying, Stephen, it's a constitutional debate. It comes to a debate about the public good, the collective rights versus the individual rights. Who trumps what between the two? It's a very, very difficult debate, but would still appeal to the employers, including Discovery, that let them allow for negotiations, let them allow for persuasion with the workers. And I think after we've done a lot of education and a lot of persuasion, we can see a lot of people agreeing to this. But indeed, you are correct. It's not an easy matter. It's a difficult matter. That's why I believe that it can end up in the court, and then we will have test cases in relation to this matter.
Minister, I do need to ask you about a much bigger issue. And I mean, apart from the pandemic, I think this is the biggest thing that we face, which is around unemployment, and particularly youth unemployment. So all around us, we see millions of people who don't have jobs. I mean, at least 12 million people don't have jobs, and you'll know the impact this has. And Minister, if I may say, everyone talks about it all the time. Everyone talks about unemployment. And you're the Minister of Employment and Labour, and I don't see you talking about it very often. So let me put the question like this. As the minister in charge of this department, what are you trying to do to create jobs and to try and fix what is a long-term problem in our economy and a long-term problem in our society?
Stephen, we are the ministry which is not creating jobs, but which is responsible for policy in order to be able to create jobs. Well, you can say indirectly we are, but jobs are not going to be created by government. Jobs are going to be created by the private sector in the main. Of course, there will be some jobs created by government. And what we have done thus far, we are ramping up or massifying what we call the public employment programs. Various programs which are run at the presidency, coordinated together with us by the different departments. We're looking at how to ensure that we massify the EPWP, the CWP, how do we massify the various youth programs which are running at the level of presidency, and in the environment, cleaning the towns. So we are looking into that, but we are saying there must be coordination between us and as government at all different levels, and together with all the departments, both horizontally and lateral. So we would be able to create some jobs. And if you look at what has been done now on a program led by the president on these mass employment programs in education, in the environment, already we're talking about 500,000 jobs which have been created. However, that's still very little looking at the numbers. But a lot of jobs, it's expected that they will come from the private sector only if we have created the right environment. The package which was presented, Stephen, by the president in the ERRP, that's a package which is trying to look into the creation of jobs in the different sectors. That's why we've been talking about the localization, the energy space, and a lot of other programs which are there. And we are saying if that program is vigorously implemented by both government and the private sector, the infrastructure and so on, we're going to see the millions of the jobs which are coming up. But if we're not able to create that particular environment, we're not going to be able to do that. So it's very clear that the jobs are going to depend on the economic growth. That's where we have to turn it around, and then we'll start seeing a lot of jobs. And indeed, we are very worried. If you listen to government, it's very clear that the most fundamental issue facing us is this question of unemployment, and all other things must respond to the issue of the unemployment. But you know that once you talk about infrastructure development, it's not going to start saying we're going to see the jobs next week. It's going to be a process. It might take time. But I can tell you, because the nature of our employment, and many of the economists and opinion makers have said it, the major problem is a structural one. It's linked to the issue of the skills, where people have not been skilled enough to be absorbed in the companies. And Minister Nzimande and a number of the departments have been dealing with this particular issue of the training and retraining, which is also done by us, to ensure that training is not for training for the sake of it or retraining, but it must be demand-led. We look at the right skills which need to be, you need to train people for.
But, I mean, Minister, all of that's true, and yet there'll be arguments about, you know, whether skilled foreigners can come in who would actually create new jobs. And I fully accept structural unemployment. From the 1970s, the percentage of people who are unemployed in the country have gone up. But it also means that you and your department have a responsibility, I would argue, I would suggest, a responsibility to help create that enabling environment. Is there evidence that you are doing that, that you're making it to the advantage of employers to actually employ people? And I fully accept the issue around skills, but the fact is that there doesn't appear to be an enabling environment.
There is. If you listen to that ERRP, has talked about a number of reforms which have to be done. We've heard other people arguing that the employers feel that our labor market is very rigid, but we have said let them come to the table and convince us. We cannot just review the current labor legislation, which was treating workers like the slaves. If there are issues, put them on the table. For instance, on the minimum wage, we've been able to say some of the employers who cannot be able to afford to pay, let those employers come and present an argument and present their books, we can be able to exempt them. Doesn't mean that we're forcing everybody. Like we're talking about the employment equity now. We have been saying also for the small employers below 50, we can be able to exempt them, not to go into all the necessary red tape. We've said we are ready to talk about all those areas. So we're very flexible, but we need people to come with very convincing arguments, put them on the table. On the issue of the foreigners which you're raising, Stephen, we have said, and this is a challenge which we're facing, where does our responsibility lie? Does it lie with us giving jobs to the national or to the other foreign nationals, or we are responsible to our own people? We believe that we are responsible to the South Africans first. However, we are bound by a number of international conventions and the issues of the rights which are in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Whether they are legal or illegal, we can't just chase them away. But we have noted a trend where a number of employers, be it in retail, in security, in the hospitality industry, in a number of industries, that they are employing more of the foreign nationals at the expense of the locals. And it's informed by one thing. People just want to exploit the cheap labor and the desperate foreign nationals. That is not going to happen. We are busy at this stage coming up with the labor migration policy. Just watch the space. In a few weeks, we'll be talking and debating about it, this particular area. But however, it does concede that particular proposal will be put in. Even if we put the quotas, that there will be areas where there are skills which we cannot have in this particular country, which we will have to import from outside. And even there will be permits which will be given for a particular period whilst you are training your own people locally.
Minister, I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much indeed. The Minister of Employment and Labour, Thulas Nxesi.